Right, a quick sort of upsum of what we've done today, which is we've covered a lot of ground, many tens of thousands of hectares, in fact. This is a Wilding Networks conference. Mike told us about, this was about collaborative working. And, you know, networks, it's about the networks of land, but it's also about the networks here, and you're obviously forging those now, which is fantastic. He talked about the Northern Wilding Intelligence Club, or network, which sounds like MI5, but I think that's basically what you guys are, so it's good that you're forming that. We heard a very useful presentation from Anne Rees, from the Rees Foundation, about their aims and about how they actually fit with the rewilding and engaging with nature across the northeast. As Anne says, you know, to make these things happen, you need land, and land is very hard to acquire, but happily Northumberland Wildlife Trust found some rotten land at West Chevington, which they're now working on. Yeah, seems to have worked a treat, Mike. But obviously, as we discussed, you know, landowners such as the National Trust who already have that land and that land at scale can actually do quite a lot, hopefully with not huge resources, but I'm sure a lot of resources will be poured into that. We're very well aware of biodiversity loss over the millennia, as were explained to us by Duncan earlier. It was a very sobering slide as we saw all the megafauna disappearing. And we heard how the Wildlife Trust is thinking big at Whiteley Moor and at Benshaw Moor as well. And then we heard about West Chev, the plans there, potential reintroductions. I think he even used the B word. He said bison, which, as you're probably well aware, Monday was World Rewilding Day. I'm sure you all took the day off work. And down in Kent, they introduced a male European bison to the Blean wildland there. So they've got a herd of European bison underway, and I'm sure they'll be happy to ship one or two of the calves up here. We heard about the vision for a wider Druridge rewilding area, ultimately stretching from the Coquet to the Line, and obviously the partnerships that will involve. Very interesting question from one of the gentlemen in the audience, talking about, you know, maybe at some stage we should be looking at compulsory purchase of land for rewilding purposes. That would be an interesting step forward, but perhaps one that our lawmakers might struggle with. We also talked about access, and obviously the tension between rewilding for nature and letting nature take its course, but nevertheless also allowing some limited public access if that doesn't interfere with our aims in terms of wildlife regeneration. We heard from Stephen about what's going on in the National Park, really exciting around Greenley Lough and the proposals there, and moving from a tenanted farming environment to a far more sort of wild one. We talked a lot about data monitoring, the fact that the National Park has actually just appointed a data monitoring officer, because you can't actually achieve these outcomes with actually the data to inform it. We talked a lot about partnerships between ourselves, but with universities, with the big agencies like Natural England and the water companies and so on. We heard about the Wilder Wallington, which is very exciting that we heard from Elaine. And again, this time the B word was beavers. And beavers are coming to Northumberland, which was all very, very, very exciting. And again, Anne Rees and the Rees Foundation are helping out with that, just as they're helping out with the National Park Project. So a big thank you to the Rees Foundation for all the incredible work that they are funding here in our region. So, the afternoon session, we've got two interesting talks coming up. We're not straying very far from Wallington, in fact, with our first one, because we're going to hear from Charlie Bennett from the Middleton North Estate, talking about the work that he's doing on his land. Charlie.
Hi there. Thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute honour to be here and to be able to talk to you. Today I'm going to talk to you, let's see how this works, about From Soil to Song. And this is something that, it's not my invention. It's a guy called George Dodds, who some of you may know. He's head of the Alnwick Wildlife Group. And he came round one day when we started on our farm, and we were in a field, and it was a big field, about 50 acres, and we found one snipe and one yellowhammer. And I'll come on to in a minute, but from what we did within 1 year in the same field, we had 300 yellowhammers in one corner, 40 linnets and 40 stonechats. And the reason for that is from soil to song. If you look after the soil, then everything else will come with it. Some people wonder why it's called Middleton North when we're actually at Middleton. The reason is because the railway station was called Middleton North, and I needed to differentiate it, and I'm absolutely mad about trains. And one Christmas, my wife gave me the old railway station as a Christmas present, and it's the best thing I've ever been given. So, where the hell is it? Well, where we're standing now is about 17 miles south of the bottom of that map. We're about 430, now about 440 acres. We're about 9 miles west of Morpeth, and we're just by the village of Middleton, as you can see there. It's a mixture. It's a sort of typical mixed Northumbrian farm in a sense of pasture, woodland, wetland, and the river, and of course my favourite thing, the old railway line. So that's what we started with. But what is it that we're trying to do? What is it about? I was inspired, as many of you probably were, by Isabella Tree's book, Wilding. I picked it up almost by mistake at King's Cross Station one evening at about 7 o'clock when I was getting on the train, and sadly Walter wasn't on there for me to blether with all the way up. But I got on the train and I read it, and I got to Newcastle Station and I sat on a metal bench until I'd finished it at Newcastle Station. I thought it was the most amazing thing, and it formulated a lot of things in my mind that I'd been thinking about. But what I also realised was, it's not for me. Knepp is a very interesting place, and it's perfect for the Wilding thing. We have got a sustainable working farm. So what I thought we need here is a blend. So it's a blend of sustainable farming with Wilding, if you like, or working with the environment. That guy there is my grandfather, Monty Watts. He farmed in Hampshire from the 1930s through to the 1960s, and he had very much a mixed farm. But he also had interesting fields, like the medicine field. He knew that he could put cattle in there, and they would almost sort of self-medicate with things like yarrow and things like that. And I think there's a knowledge gap, which maybe I'll come on to talk to in a minute, that happened just after the war. We knew about all this stuff. He knew about all this stuff. He wouldn't look over the gate of my farm and think I've gone mad like a lot of my neighbours do. He would know exactly what we're doing. And the reason is that after the war, what came along with chemicals and having to make large-scale agriculture, it's a bit, I know you guys know about COVID. You see somebody go, I saw you 2 years ago. You go, no, Charlie, it was 4 years ago. It's because COVID, there's this weird fog, isn't there? And it's the same with farming. I think that knowledge was there and it's been lost. And we can bring it back so we can work in tandem with the environment as our old farming relations did in the past. So we're working very much about production and having a sustainable farm. I'm not Wilding. You might call it that, but I see it as working in tandem with the environment. I see the environment as a crop. It's not something over here. It's something that's in here. So my hedges are there. Yes, they are there for wildlife. I don't cut my hedges. I get a lot of stick around where I live. You'll know if you want to come and find me, so I don't cut any hedges. And I get calls, hey, Charlie, can we cut your hedge? It's a flipping mess. And I'm like, no, you can't. I'm sorry. And the reason is there's a perception that if your hedges are messy, then you're messy. It's bonkers. And it's a waste of diesel and it's a waste of carbon. But anyway, that's if you want to find me, come and find my messy hedges. Anyway, so we try to work with that. And if land is unproductive, then we don't farm it. We use it for other things. So, as I say, I really want to make the environment into a crop. And that's how I want farmers to see it. And I think actually when you talk to farmers like this, they start to understand it. So I want to make food, but I also want to look after the environment. So why farm with wildlife? I mean, the maddest rims say this, aren't they? I mean, duh. Mass extinction. Things are going extinct. We used to have aurochs running around our place. We had giant elk running around. We had wolves. We had bears. So if we're going to have another bee in the room, I think bring back the bear. I think that'd be much more entertaining to have a few bears running around Middleton. But there is a problem with that. And the thing that's interesting that people don't often touch on is the obvious things, like we talked about beavers and things. But also the things you see every day, like blackbirds and robins, common garden birds. You see them, but their numbers are also dropping. You've got to take that into mind. It's the stuff we've already got that we've also got to look after. And that's due to a loss of habitat for the reasons I've described earlier. And that's across the whole farming world and the world. But I don't think we should blame farmers for this. After the war, they were encouraged to make food for us and to get stuck in. And suddenly, on the turn of a sixpence, they're being asked to go all after the environment. I think We really need to involve them and bring them on board. I think the relationship between government and farmers has been a top-down relationship. It's been like a teacher-child relationship. It needs to be a partnership, and we need to work together. And I think that's super, super important. Anyway, so World War II, as I say, there was a big change that happened after that due to chemicals, machinery, etc. And then there's this loss of knowledge, which I described earlier. But I think the knowledge is there, and it's coming back. And what's really encouraged me as I've done this is it just comes back like that. And you bring, farmers, you get, 8-year-old farmers that come around the farm, and they just, suddenly all this knowledge just starts pouring out. Or they remember things. And it's so important to involve them as much as we get agronomists and scientists and stuff. You've got to involve your local community because they'll have knowledge that is just so important. So what have we done? Well, that's one of our ponds. That's an old oxbow. And the reason we dug that out is my neighbour on the other side will not fence off their bit of the river. And so the river is full of their cattle and all the problems that go with that. So I thought, well, if we fence that off and dig it out, then that'll give us back all those plants that we've lost on the riverbank due to the cattle, which it did. And we dug that. That was on the day. You remember the day it was 37 degrees? That's the day we did it, and it filled up with water straight away. So there's obviously water there. And the digger driver, John, who's just a flipping genius, he should be in the Royal Academy. He's such an amazing artist. Let's look at the shapes. It's gorgeous. Anyway, he dug that. And the other thing I did, he didn't have any plans. He didn't have any bits of stick with levels in. I just said, John, just make it great. And that's what he did. Anyway, so we've done that. And those ponds have come courtesy of, I'll talk about this in a minute, but came courtesy of Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola came through the Northumberland Rivers Trust, a part of the Rivers Trust across the whole country. And they came to me and they said, Charlie, do you want a pond? I said, yeah, I'd love a pond. I said, do you want any more ponds? And Harry Baker Creswell amazingly said to me, Charlie, ask them for 11 ponds. I was like, why, Harry? And he said, because we could have a wetland. I was like, okay, great. Can I have 11 ponds, please? And they said, is that all you want? So I said, 16. And they went, you can have 13. I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, so we took 13 ponds. And Coca-Cola have been an amazing partner because they have got a global policy to put more water back into the earth than they take out. And they actually do it. It's not greenwashing. They're not putting their money into a bank or something. They're actually doing it. Because you can't turn on a tap, and put water back in the environment. You've got to work with wetlands and the environment, which is what they're doing. And their volunteers have come out and not only helped with this, but also with planting trees, etc. And then their European CEO came out. He's responsible for a turnover of £2.1 billion. I didn't know him when he turned up. He was just a bloke that turned up at the farm. And we're walking around and chatting about this, that, and the other, and he went to get on the bus and said, do you know who that is? I was like, no, Steve. They went, well, Steve's the global CEO. I was like, oh, right, yeah. It turns out Steve's a farmer. So Steve gets it. So if any of you often get asked this question, how do you unlock the money from private companies into the environment? Often the answer is the CEO knows. So Molson Coors, who hadn't been for COVID, were going to have their global sustainability conference on our farm, because we had a conversation with them. I said, you are a farming business. And they, what do you mean? So all of your products, all of your beer originates on a farm. What is your relationship with your farmers, other than it being a commodity and a transactional relationship? And a big penny dropped because the top guy got it. So if that's a question you guys wonder about, find out who the top person is, the CEO, what they're all like. Anne, for example, is another great proponent of that. So we've also planted 15,000 trees, and that's been with the Woodland Trust. So the Woodland Trust got wind of what we were doing, and amazingly, Sean Atkinson and Rachel and all the other guys have just been incredible. They supplied the trees, and we supplied the protection. And it was in the middle of COVID. So we set up a wildlife group in the village and said, does anybody want to come plant trees? It was like a stampede to our gate. And luckily, we had one of our volunteers is a head of contagious diseases at Newcastle University. So I said to her, Jennifer, can you explain to them why this is safe? Her specialisation is Ebola, by the way, so she does know. And so she explained it, and then all I had to do was give them cake. And then they just got on and planted trees for weeks on end, which was tremendous. Woodland pasture, which is, I know is a big thing. Our form of woodland pasture is a 12-foot by 12-foot cage with a canopy tree in the middle of it, with scrubby trees around the outside of it, like rowan or dogwood or that sort of thing. And it makes a little place where things can hop from one place to another. My thing is all about connectivity, whether it's from hedges to woods to these woodland pastures. And also, importantly, it gives shelter to stock 360 degrees round. So back to the thing, we're farming and looking after the environment. We've also converted all of our arable has gone to meadow-rich pasture. So that's at least 7 different species of plant. And then we've done the wildflower mixes and the wild bird mixes. Here's the thing, I'll talk to you in a minute, is I'm sure other people in this room have had advice from people that's been really crap. I have had loads of it. And when I first started, I couldn't believe somebody purported to know what they were talking about, gave me really crap advice, and I took it. And one of those things was a thing called fodder radish. If anybody ever does this, do not put fodder radish in your wild bird mixes, because it doesn't attract linnets and yellowhammers. It attracts 1 million rats and about 1 billion pigeons. I then had to spray it all off and plough it all in. And then somebody's like, Charlie, there's a lot of rats in the village. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so yeah, be careful what you wish for, what you ask for. So we've also done the bird hide, and that was done with Greggs and Coca-Cola. And then we've done numerous owl boxes, kestrel boxes, small bird boxes. And again, the bird boxes, quite often we've got loads of jackdaws. I've got lots of grey squirrels. But they do work, and it's been amazing putting all those things in. How does that all happen? Well, George Dodds, who I mentioned earlier, and the volunteers, the Alnwick Wildlife Group, have been amazing. And what they've done is they've gathered data. And again, you guys will know this, but the data is so important. So from the very first time we started on this project, we started gathering the data. If one of you or any of you come for a walk on the farm, we gather the data. And it all goes to Eric in Newcastle, so it's available centrally. And that's with their help. And then with the Northumberland Rivers Trust and Coca-Cola, the Woodland Trust I've mentioned, an amazing help from the government agencies, the Environment Agency, Natural England. I have had, I'll come on to it in a minute, various problems with the government, to be honest. But the individuals I find are amazing, and they are superstars, and they've been really helped me and made it really happen. The other thing that's helped me is the history of our place. So our place was, a big part of it was originally part of the Greenwich Hospital. I don't know if you all know this, I won't give you a massive history lesson, but the Earl of Derwentwater was a Jacobite, and he owned land all the way through, including ours, and he had the choice of his religion or his head, basically. And he went for the loss of head and land option, which is probably not the best one. Anyway, all of that land got given over to the Crown, and they then handed it over to the Greenwich Hospital to create income for sailors, etc. And that is a massive benefit to us because they mapped it all. And I knew this map existed. I couldn't flipping find it. And then I found a little reference on Google, and it was next door in the Lytton Fill. I found out today it's a bit of a anyway, I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk about the Lytton Fill in this building, but anyway. Anyway, next door, they found this reference, and the lady brought the map out, and she put it on the table, and I was just like, oh my God. And this other woman said to me, you're going down a rabbit hole with this, aren't you? And I said, yeah, big time, and I still am. That map gave us all the original boundaries to all the fields, and it gave us all the original field names back. I don't know if any of you are into field names. There's a brilliant book called Field Names by Frank Field. I mean, you know. So, good old Frank, and available at Barter Books. And so he told me all these names. So my favourite field name we came up with was called Bowron's Grave. And I thought, is that a place where a favourite pig was buried? And it's not. It's a Bowron's Grave. A grave was a grove was a wood. So that tells me that's a good place possibly to plant trees with mycorrhizal fungi, etc. And that 1805 thing gave me all of that. But I'm quite visual, and I wanted to see I could see it visually. And I thought, who's around at that time who saw the world visually? Thomas Buick was. So I got all of Thomas Buick's books, and I got all our data I was saying about earlier, and I compared what he drew around us. He'd spent a lot of time at Wallington, just next door to us. And I've got an Excel spreadsheet of what he saw and what we've seen, and what's missing and what's not missing. And it changes all the time. So, for example, when he was around, we had cranes with us. They went extinct 2 years ago. We had a crane. So build it, and they'll come. But that's been really important. History's been a really important thing, as well as the advisors that I've mentioned earlier. So has it worked out for the environment? Well, as I said earlier, we've had those 300 yellowhammers. We've just seen our bird counts have just gone off the scale. It's totally nuts. It happens almost immediately. Within 2 years, it's a totally and utterly different place. And we're seeing new species all the time. We're seeing the increase, I said to you, really importantly, of our existing species. So back to blackbirds or dunnocks or everyday common and garden birds. They're all increasing all the time. And it's really important. What we can't see is what's going on in the soil. So I've got a hell of a lot of moles. I love moles, and not just because they're cuddly and small and a bit blind like me, but because they are, for example, I don't know if you know this, but they carry around the spores of mycorrhizal fungi. So that's how that's getting around. They are irrigating, and they're also aerating the soil. They are incredible creatures. So what they're doing under the soil is very important, as well as everything else. And we are in the process now of testing our soil all the time to see how it's improving. So that gives you your from soil to song. But has it worked for the farming? Well, it has. The bales of hay and things that we've grown have been absolutely outstanding. And I phoned the farmer who bought it all last year. Do you want it? Yes, please. He's straight back. He wants it back. And the silage and the cows that are eating it are obviously getting really good fodder. I've also done with our stocking, I've halved the stocking rates across our farm, but I've also halved the rent and given them a bit more land. And it's meant that the grasses are no longer what I call sheep-wrecked. So we get different heights of grass within the sward. And then something really exciting we're doing this year with help from Lilburn is we're going to be harvesting we've got some really nice flower meadows. We're going to be harvesting the meadows and putting that back in to our existing sward. So our old rig and furrow, which we think some of it's from the 16th century, we still want to increase the types of species in there, which we can do with that. So yeah, happy sheep, again, because of the lack of sheep wrecking, and the bees. And our bees are off the scale. We had, this time last year, the head of Bumblebee Conservation. And it's one of those things like, are there actually going to be any today? Anyway, luckily she came, and we found sort of 13 different species of bumblebee. And so they're very happy, and they're going around pollinating everybody's rape crops around us, etc. It's not all easy, is it? Is it? And you probably hear this all the time. It is a factory with a roof open. It does go nuts. The day we made all that hay I was telling you about, we had the biggest thunderstorm we've ever had. We were running around like loons trying to get it in. Government, oh my God. I don't know where to start really, but I'm still looking for money that I should have been paid last August. We don't know what's happening with the policy. I thought Elms was going to be amazing. It's pretty disappointing. So that is what it is. So I just work with it, and we just keep going with it, and hopefully it'll improve over time. I know Clarkson doesn't get a great press, but he did show something with his original program, is that it is difficult, it is hard, and you do learn from a lot of mistakes, but I think that's a good thing. And the listening to advice, as I was talking to, be careful who you listen to, because it's not always good advice, but do have a mind out, because this knowledge and what's happening, and just see from the people I'm seeing in this room, is spreading all the time. And it used to be, I don't know if Walter would agree, but it was a lonely furrow when I started this. People just thought I was a total nutter. They probably still do. But there are more and more people doing this all over the country and all over the world. So there is good advice out there. And there was skepticism from the farming industry, as you could imagine. But I worked on another project with Harry Baker Creswell at Blagden across 5,000 acres. And we had landowners and tenants. You've probably heard this statistic today, but 60% of Northumberland is tenanted. It's really important that we bring those guys in and involve them, because it's very hard for them to then plant trees or dig ponds and stuff, because they're quite often now on shortening tenancies. So really important, we got them all on board. They didn't know what biodiversity was or natural capital, but as soon as you explained to them exactly what it is, they got it. And they started realizing they could build this into their farming practices. So farming skepticism, I think, is something which is diminishing. Was it worth it? My God, was it worth it? Kids from 3 to 103. You're all kids. You just, maybe, you got a pension or you earn a bit of money. That's the only difference. You're still a kid. It's still the same. And the kids we get, a lot of them are from the sort of more difficult places of the northeast. And with the help of Anne and various others, we've been in the Country Trust, we've been able to bring them out. And honestly, it's hilarious. There's a little boy came out called Frankie. And he got off the bus and he went, Farmer Charlie, because that's what they call me. Farmer Charlie, could I have this stone? I said, yeah, of course you can. He said, it's important because it's Timothy Rock. I said, well, you better put Timothy Rock in your pocket then. So he goes in his pocket. Anyway, as we went around, he picked up bones, feathers, leaves, branches. And he came up to me when he got this sort of stuff, and he said, Farmer Charlie, yes, Frank, can you email this to us? And I said, I can't email it to you, Frankie, but I'll stick it in a box for you. And he went, all right, good. Anyway, he got on the bus, and the bus was leaving the yard. And to be honest with you, I'm always quite relieved when they leave, because they haven't, been eaten by one of my bears I'm releasing. And he got off the bus, and he said, I just wanted to tell you something important. I said, what did he say? Timothy Rock's on the bus. And off he went. And that is just one of endless stories. They are an absolute delight and make it all worthwhile. So farmers are getting it, say private companies are getting it, government's listening, more landowners are getting it, and we're still making food, as I said to you earlier, so it is mixed. So, and I absolutely love it. I think you can tell I'm quite fired up. So what's next? We need to diversify that knowledge, how we get it out there, how we get different people involved. And it's not just about nature and wilding and the environment, it's also about how you portray that. So we're getting photographers. I've got an artist called Chris Partridge, and I've got a photographer called Chris Woodcock. And I call them the game birds. They don't like it, but that's... But they are amazing, and they're the ones that take amazing photographs, do art in the environment and all the rest of it. And then I also want to get involved with the education side. I don't know if you guys know, but there's a GCSE coming out in natural history. I'm sure you'll do. In the past, that was just an exam question. It was on paper. It wasn't something that actually happened in the environment. I want to be a centre of excellence for that. We're planting new woods with Mark, saw earlier, yeah. And we're doing a load of that. And then we're doing the meadows, I was saying. And I'm just totally open-minded. So mycorrhizal fungi, I'm so excited about it. I don't know if you saw the David Attenborough thing the other night. I think they portrayed it really well. But so my favourite tree was a beautiful 300-year-old oak tree that fell over in Arwen. All the really crap ones managed to stand up. But the best tree fell over. And so rather than chopping it up for firewood, I fenced it off. And the previous year, I'd taken its acorns and grown little baby oak trees. And I planted them around it, with the idea is the mycorrhizal fungi from the parent tree will look after the younger ones. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm not going to live long enough to see it, but it kind of feels good, doesn't it? So all that's coming, and it's super exciting. Any questions? Well, I thought I'd help you out with one. What am I doing? We bury pants. If you bury a pair of pants, clean ones, mind you, after 6 months, the worms will have eaten them, and various other things in there. And that's just a demonstration of what happens. So get your pants buried and you'll keep your worms happy. So I hope that's been interesting. If you've got any questions, please fire away.
I think we'll crack on with Walter and then we'll take questions to the pair of you afterwards. That was incredibly engaging, incredibly infusing. Very exciting stuff.
Do you want to go on to Walters?
That would be great.
You just do it.
Right, straight off the back for this double act, we've got Walter Riddle.
Down the rabbit hole.
There we go.
God. Charlie, it's very hard to follow you. So I've got a plan, which is that I think later there's going to be a bar. And the question is, that I'm trying to answer in mine is, how do you make money out of this? It's one of the questions I'm trying to answer. So instead of trying to be funny, because I'm not as funny as Mr. Bennett here, I'm going to commend this to you. And there's 2 bottles behind the bar later, so just crack on. But the shame of it is that 200 years ago or more, my predecessors bought this place called Heppel, which is a sort of 4,000-acre area in the middle of Northumberland on the edge of the national park. It is on the edge of the Simonside. And they bought it for coal. And the idea was that my face would be up amongst this lot here somewhere. But there wasn't. Actually, it was a great relief. And as a result of that, my family's been trying to work out how to afford living here. And I went to go and crush widows and orphans when I was a boy in the City of London. I became an investor in tech companies. I did that for 17 years, and I came back up north to try and answer the question of what do you make of this place? What is it that is valuable, and how do you create and find that value? And as you probably know, it's in the Coquet Valley. It's a lovely, beautiful, quiet valley of its own with a lot of sheep farming. And sheep farming was the dominant pursuit along with some sporting stuff that went... By sporting, of course, we all know that means shooting stuff, that goes on the top of Simonside. And then there was a little bit of forestry as well. But the joy of Heppel, and the joy that you find now, this is a picture that was taken, I think, 10 years ago, is in the quiet places where there weren't sheep, there weren't cattle. And this is from 10 years ago. It's a sort of little magical pocket. And that, for me, when you grow up in London, getting your vowels in London, is where you disappear off to when you have a moment. The farming at Heppel had been very gently run with the help of Mary's stewardship. Mary joined as our environmental consultant, what's the correct term, Mary, for you? She does everything, okay? But she used to run the relationship between the national park and farmers for many, many years before. And as a result, the farm had been very gently run. And this is a picture from quite a wet area where you can see the Angus cattle happily coexisting in a sort of bucolic ideal from that period. So the farm was not run down from an ecological perspective. What it wasn't doing was generating any money. This was a sort of picture of my head as Lucy, my wife, and I came back up to Northumberland. There was a moorland bit with some shooting, which neither of us particularly enjoyed, which didn't produce any money. There was a farm, bare of animals, as it turned out, or with very few animals, which didn't make any money. And then there's a bit of forestry, which doesn't make any money. So, joy. So, 2020, after years of sitting in those sort of magical glades and thinking about what mattered to us and where we could find some value, we decided to try and deal with the infighting that was going on amongst those three different economic areas that weren't sharing their land. And we decided, it's really hard to explain what we've done in a short sentence, but it's basically putting ecosystem services first, putting ecosystem health at the core of everything we do. And if we make money from it, it's because it's a subsidiary activity that benefits from the wildness that occurs as a result. And what does a healthy ecosystem mean? This is a really hard thing to put your finger on, but for us, it's something that's interconnected, something that's self-driving, something that's resilient, and that it generates potential for itself and for humans. And there's an I think the key word that we're trying to find life in is interrelationships, whether it's between different parts of the ecosystem or between the people and it, and between the activity, the economic activity that happens on the place. And so we come up with this logo. I can go into the logo in a second. But there was a big change that happened in 2020. And the most important thing for us was that we retained the people that used to work on the land as people who have expertise and who we want to keep on. So on the left-hand side, we see Michael being nearly gored by a Highland bull. He loves the Highlanders, really. But the Robson family have been farming there for well over 50 years. And going back to Charlie's point about his grandfather, there are points when, in the conversation about how we want to see the farming change, where Michael says, oh, my grandfather used to do that, or my dad, John, who's still on the farm, used to do that. And there's deep expertise in these people that, despite their apparent dislike, stereotypically speaking, of this process as sheep farmers, they've found things that they can draw on which are incredibly helpful in managing the stock that we have. The other side of the equation is the sporting fraternity. So anyone here who wants to change big tracts of land in Northumberland, you've got to work out what you do with the sporting people. And by that I mean people who own the land and people who work on the land. And so Philip has not quite got rid of his camos, but he's the gamekeeper. He used to be the gamekeeper. But he's proudly sporting his still suspenders, and he's our sort of human wolf. And he actually thinks of himself as this, and I think he's a wonderful job, actually, but we need to keep things moving, and his expertise, his sort of innate understanding about how wild animals move and what habitats they like to work to live in, that's been critical for us. And then, thanks to Mary and her network of you guys, we've managed to bring people in, and here goes the logos. We've worked with a whole range of people on advice and on monitoring. There's a lot of monitoring that's happened over the last 3 years, but the hardest thing, I think, to measure is about ecosystem health, because you can measure how many pigeons you have, or how many blackbirds you have, or how many tons of carbon in certain parts of your ground. But what does that tell you about ecosystem health? If ecosystem health is the relationship between different things, then what you're trying to find is the health of a system. So systems engineering or systems monitoring on something the scale of HEPL is really tricky, And we're quite excited about working with a guy called Darren Evans, who is a systems engineer at Newcastle University. We're not sure how well or how ready his monitoring system is for this, but we're hoping that he can help us really monitor that systems change. But we've done a whole lot of baseline monitoring, and this is it's a habitat survey, it's a UK HAB survey, which was done just 2 years ago, and it shows two things, I think. One is each colour is a different sort of land type, and you can see the residual sort of moorland at the bottom and the pattern of farming on the top. The really interesting places is where you get confusion and chaos. And that's a state that you can see, look at me, I love that moment. So there's points over there where the burn comes off the moor, where you're starting to get really interesting confusion. There's parts of the wet areas amongst that purple at the top there where you're getting lots of confusion. And it's that ability to interact and intersect which produces the ecosystem health that we're looking for. So what have we done to generate that? Well, we have totally changed the stock. We've taken off the sheep, and that was a hugely difficult moment because of its historic and sort of community-based significance in this landscape. And we've got some cattle which are resilient to the overwintering that we need from them. We hope they do taste delicious. I mean, it's key that they taste delicious. But these things pretty much look after themselves, they birth themselves. You all know the benefits of the sort of Nepian longhorn. There are issues with these guys, one of which is that they like sitting in nice warm pockets and they don't move around. So we have asked the Highlanders, who are generally worse behaved and quite angry, in fact, to submit themselves to the no-fence collar system, which we're just experimenting with. The idea is that these guys go in as crack troops to attack the bracken beds and are moved around. Now, if our still wearing mobile human wolf is not capable of pushing the cattle, which is probably not, we've now decided to move away from the system that we started with, which was just extensive grazing wherever they want, whenever they want, to actually grazing in a much more disciplined way around the place. And we've got these beauties who conceptually, again, the idea was that they'd push their way through the deeper parts of the moor and create sort of channels for other animals to follow them. Has it worked? They look beautiful. They do move quite widely, but I'm not sure it's complete. But it's work in motion. It's work in progress. And then these guys, I think what I can say about them is that they tasted good. I'm not entirely sure that they did quite the good that we wanted. I hate fences. These guys had to be fenced. If you have to put a fence in, then you're destroying the basic principle of the structure, which is interrelationships and confusion. So these guys needed fences. The other input that we've engaged in, like Charlie, is wildflower meadows, and where we're probably tripling the quantity of wildflower meadows in the area on our patch. And the result, if you take the stocking density down to about a quarter of its original level, and you've added those animals that we've added, you're starting to see a dramatically different pasture from the sort of sheep-grazed area that you would have seen in the past. And this is a cool thing that we're doing at Newcastle University. It's a heat map that shows the movement of these three different animal types, the longhorn, the highland, and the horse, around areas at Heppel. This is just from 1 month. And what I like about that is the sort of sporginess of it. You're not seeing a rigid movement that is indicated, the field boundaries are indicated. They're going into woods, they're pushing all the sort of hard edges of the past away. But in some cases we haven't been able to use animals. We'll always use animals if we possibly can, but the digger is the only thing to do if you're trying to get big changes to peatland, which is where this picture is taken. And the other one is in the wetland areas, or the wetter areas at the bottom of the valleys. The cool thing that we're seeing, and Charlie's saying in his presentation, is the speed of change. So it's just 1 year between this and this. Isn't that cool? And the extraordinary thing is that Lucy and I would come down in the morning and we would hear noise of insects in the way that we never, ever, ever heard them before. And that's why we've chosen the dragonfly for our logo, because we're trying to, again, where's the value? in all this loveliness? Well, first of all, it's ecological. And the interesting thing here is the extraordinary direct relationship between the insects and the plants that are coming through. And in all these cases, well, particularly on the left-hand side, we've never had lady smock before. Those sheep pastures were bare through the spring and summer. We took the stock off, everything went bolting upright, and there was white across an astonishing quantity of our sheep pasture. The next year, we got orange-tipped butterflies. And am I right, Mary, in saying the only thing that the pupa of the orange-tipped butterfly needs is lady smock? And so that's a change of 2 derivative levels, as it were, in just 2 years. And we're seeing that across a range of plants, which is really exciting. And these are things that we haven't yet seen. Now I'm going to forget their names, so I'm not going to try, but we have plenty of juniper, a certain amount of creeping willow, plenty of bog myrtle, and some scabious coming through. So we'd expect to see these butterfly and moths emerging. So that's the ons, then there's the offs. What's in the out tray? The out tray is alien invasives, and obviously I'm not meaning that glorious chap from the Tyneside Rugby Club, it's the Sitka that is all over the place that we're trying to eradicate because as a non-native it's monoculture in preference. This is wonderful Alec, who is in the audience, leaping onto the Rhododendron ponticum. My dad said that he shouldn't die until all the rhododendron has been taken out of purple, and unfortunately he died, so it's now on, it's like an inherited debt, which I've got to take on. So we're killing the rhodie with great abandon, this is a little video to show that once you've taken those problems out, you can let things go. Once you've introduced the cattle to move in the way that we're hoping, you can let things go. But there's a lot of management in letting them go. And what you're seeing is a lot of scrub and pioneer woodland emerging across the place. And this is a whole lot of birch at the moment, but amongst that birch you're seeing rowan and willow and a bit of juniper and a variety of other things. But from this, that's jolly nice. What's the point? What's the value? Well, we're seeing, like Charlie's seeing, amazing changes in the bird populations, just astonishingly speedy. And I won't bore you with my lack of knowledge about whitethroats, willow tits and stone chats. There we are. So that's jolly nice, but how do you make any money out of it? What's the value proposition from that? Well, if you've put wildness as your core strong suit, then you've got to come up with a business that directly relates to that, that draws on that wildness. And the one thing that we did have at Heppel is lots of juniper, and you can't create gin. Now here comes the marketing story, okay, so get ready. You can't make juniper without, you can't make gin without juniper. And there's lots of juniper. It occupies probably 0.001% of the ground, but it produces at least half the current income if you take it as a fully owned entity of the place. I used to invest in tech stocks, so I love techie stuff. And it's fine to have the juniper, but if you just bung it in a hot, if you bung it in a hot copper pot still like that thing on the bottom left, you will cook the juniper away. You will cook any freshness away. You make it less distinguished. So what we had to do is put a vacuum still in and something called the supercritical extraction system, and that just gets a much broader range of flavors. So when you drink Heppel, but when you drink Heppel, what you get is, you are tasting. We are so bad at marketing, actually, in our little company. We don't know how to do it, but what we find is that when we do bring people there, they have this astonishing relationship that they build with the natural world. And in fact, it should not need, when I get in the way, it confuses it. When people have a direct relationship, no signs, no interpretation centers, just a direct relationship with a place, then it starts to get interesting. We started the distillery way before we made the changes on the ground, and here's some longhorn sort of budging up, and in some cases rather destroying some juniper bushes of mine. But we worked with a very, very fine steak restaurant called Hawksmoor, and it was really cool to be able to say, yes, we produce some fantastic beef. We produce, hopefully, the best organic, pasture-fed, blah, blah, blah beef that you can find, apart from Charlie's, in the north. But we also produced produce your spirits, we make your martini, so we made them a specialist product. And we cut the back-facing cow out of the picture. It seems like a really bad idea, but that's the back end is where it all goes on, of course. That's where the key thing is. And here's Daryl. We have some crazy-looking people, wonderful-looking people turning up, and we give the bartenders the opportunity to plant juniper in the ground, and it forces them to stay loyal to Heppel, because it takes 15 years for the thing to emerge as either a female or a male. So they've got to stay loyal for a long time before they can come back and pick the berries that come off these little babies. So that's the idea. And then, just like Charlie, it is a joy when people like Archie Wilde, I think, isn't it, from Wild Farm in Ponteland, come and just let their feralness play, just like me in my boxer shorts at the bottom of the burn, when I was a kid. It's great to be like that, and you do become a kid again. And then Gordon Port running our BioBlitz, which is cool. Oh yes, this is really important. Okay, it's a little noisy. It should be dead quiet. And the thing is, if you want to make a martini, if you want to make the top gin cocktail in the world, what you need to do is you take this gin, and then a little splash of it, and then you stir it with ice. That's all you need to do. What you shouldn't do is do it in your T-shirt in January of 2020, because the next thing that happens, I got COVID, and then I got and all my feet went black, literally, my toes went black. But it's very important for you to know that of all the cocktails, the martini is the key one. And this gin is made for martini drinking. No, the point is that I think you can make there is a connection between making something of great ecological value and something of decent economic value. And you can have a distillery in the middle of that, and for it not to disturb the wildness of it is, I think, possible. So that's my answer. There's other parts of it as well, like what we're hoping for from wild carbon credits, possibly a bit of biodiversity net gain. But for me, this is what really matters, is independence of Garsley government. That's it from me.
Well, thank you very much for that, Walter. There's a great cocktail of ingredients going on at Heppel, clearly. You seem to have got the mix right. So, we've heard from both Charlie and Walter with some very interesting and exciting and innovative approaches to rewilding. So, we've got time for some questions, and the roving mics will be roving. So, if you've got questions for Charlie and Walter, fire away. And we're off.
You said about your neighbours and the reaction you got. Have you seen a change, a real significant change in their reaction?
So my neighbour is an agricultural contractor. He was one of the first people to tell me what I was doing was completely mad, because he used to rent it. He was the one that grew crops in it. And then he came along to see what we were doing, and he said, "Are you making any money?" I said, "Yeah, I am making money." And also the place is changing. And he started walking over it. And one day the ponds people turned up, and he said, "Can I have a quiet word with the ponds people?" He's now dug 4 ponds. He's now put in wildflower margins. So it does pretty quickly when they see it and it works and they can integrate it, they change. And I'm seeing that. I've got the young farmers coming in May. And I said, "I'm really sorry, I'm away, I can't show you around." And they said, "Well, we're not coming unless you show us around." So they are integrating and it's working, so it's really important.
Excellent. Well spotted, Liz. You've got sharper eyes than me.
Thank you. This has just been a fantastic day. I'm the Chief Executive of Urban Green Newcastle. We look after all the parks and allotments in the city. We've talked a lot about rural areas over the whole day. I'm really fascinated, particularly from our last 2 speakers. How can we take the inspiration of what you're doing in a rural area and bring it into an urban one?
Let's hear about Wild Oosburn.
Is that on? Okay, this isn't fair, actually. I'll tell you that, I think we can do it quite easily, actually. I think that is a door that's already open. We don't even have to push against it. I think so many people want it, right, that it's just a question of can they see a way of contributing to it happening. And, I talked this morning a little bit about our vision document, and it is actually literally a document, right? That's all it is, with a lot of passion behind it. And what I think is, if it goes the way we hope it's going to go, people will read that and think, that's exactly what I think should happen. That's exactly what we want to do. Put it in a framework where people can take action and actually contribute to it, show them how they can do it, and I think we'll get an awful lot of people on board. Right? The practicalities, this doesn't answer, which I'm sure is what you're talking about. Like, where's the money coming from? Which is a very big question in the city of Newcastle. Oh, it's a big question everywhere, but it's a very big question here. What we think is, and this is all to be discussed, and there'll be lots of ideas from brilliant people that are going to contribute to this. But what we think is there are these waves of funding actually, that is available. And if you're ready for them, you can get them. Right, but you have to be ready for them. If you're not quite ready for them, they'll go, and then you've missed them because daft government, as has been referred to, or whatever, ghastly government, even better. They don't work in a way that it's very easy to work with. But if you're ready for it and you can see it coming, or you've got something, oven ready, if you like, that funding, we can then get onto the back of it. There's already some of that around. There's people in the city. I won't mention any names, but football comes into it, who want to contribute to this area, right? And you've got to find those people as well. They've got money, right? There's people with money want to help us. And so I think that's what you do. And we all work together, that's the other thing. And we make sure we don't keep our own little patch. And that's the whole point about the Oosburn document. There's not a little patch in there. No one organisation has contributed to that. We wouldn't let anybody contribute to it so that everybody can. And we don't want anybody in their little patch doing their little thing. Everybody is going to be part of the bigger vision and do what they can to enact it. And I think it'll work. Right? And then when it works there, other people can start doing it in their areas and the areas that they're passionate about.
Can I just answer that briefly? We are already doing quite a lot, and also in partnership with yourselves, of course, on engaging people, working in communities, trying to reach new audiences across the city, connecting with existing food growing associations, etc. So much we are doing, but again, it's about upscaling, and it is about trying to see all of the green areas across the whole of the city and the corridors within that as one big area for development and for rewilding within the city, I think. So whilst, again, we have a project funded Nature in the City, it's one small element of that. We need to be doing that as a big wheel across the city and into Gateshead as well, crossing the river. So we've got, again, the whole of the urban area tied into that. There are some good examples around in other areas. In the centre of Nottingham, they've done that as part of a new shopping centre development. Massive new green development. In Derbyshire, they've taken on the biggest urban park in Derby, the Wildlife Trust, to manage it and rewild it. And it's their equivalent of the town moor. And you've got to think about how that is in the centre, this green heart, in the centre of Newcastle, which, there's been improvements, hasn't there, over the years, but what potential that could represent. And if we can unlock that, that's when these starts to make a real difference. The Oosburn, I think, again, is a specific big opportunity. It's a piece of linkage within the whole landscape. So that's a good place to start. But, let's roll it out across the whole city if we can. People want it and need it to happen.
Any more questions for Charlie and Walt? Gentlemen, huh?
It was just a quick question, really, for yourselves, chaps. I imagine most people in the room have probably heard about local nature recovery strategies. And really, an awful lot of what we've been talking about today, very much kind of, links and ties in with local nature recovery strategies. Our work in local government, a responsible authority for a particular local nature recovery strategy, and I'm just really interested. We at the moment are starting to think about, stakeholders, those groups, individuals, associations, institutions, and the like, who we'll have to engage with, as part of that local nature recovery strategy process. Landowners, and particularly, farmers, are going to be a really important part of that. So I'm thinking, linking with the NFU and with the Countryside Landowners Association. But is that going to, get me, linking up with all farmers? How else would we best go about that, do you think, really, rather than just the sort of more obvious sort of routes? I don't want it to be just a tick box exercise.
I could talk about this. Okay, go on. I'm going to be rude about the NFU, though.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. I don't mind that. All I was going to say was trying to get farmers to collaborate is like getting cats in a bag. Yeah. So, but you can do it, and the reason the way you do it is you don't do it in the obvious way. You invite them to something, you talk about what they're doing, and then you give them plenty of space to slag you off afterwards. Yeah. So, or whatever. I mean, what it actually means is they then go and talk amongst each other. And we've done this in a landscape scale project near Blagdon. We did a 5,000 acre project with tenant farmers, landowners, and a number of landowners. And that's the way we did it, was we brought them together, but we didn't do it in the sort of straight in your face kind of way. We did it in a more subtle way. And by the end of 6 months, they'd bought into it.
Yeah. I'm just kind of conscious that in terms of language, is likely to be really important. And obviously yourselves, you're very sort of engaging and very progressive in terms of your approach, and that won't necessarily be the case with everybody, but having access to kind of advocates, really good examples, kind of exemplars of kind of best practice and all the rest of it, it strikes me as though that would be really, really useful. The likes of yourselves are going to be much more effective in terms of possibly engaging with landowners and farmers than, say, for instance, the local authority ecologist who's maybe likely to be viewed, with some scepticism.
In my sense, John Creswell will have a better view on this as well, far better than me, but I think that some of those big farmer groups, like the NFU, but not necessarily in the NFU, they're just representing the more paranoid and nervous parts of the farming community. Or they feel a need to represent the fears of the farming community sometimes. Am I getting that right, John? John's the man. I'm going to pass it up to him.
It's dangerous talking too generically about farmers, isn't it? But as I get older, it never ceases to amaze me. When I left university, I thought it was all about profit maximisation, and that's why farmers, do things. And you can listen to Charlie and Walter and see that in the obvious ways that's clearly not true. But there's another one, which is that there's a big percentage of farmers who truly believe that they're there to feed the world, and they feel it deep in their souls. And so I think you have to do slightly different things for different audiences, but the sort of stuff that Charlie's talking about is very relevant. And in the end, money talks. A lot of these guys feel under financial pressure, and the price of wheat, I don't know if you've seen, has fallen to today 195 quid, down from 280 quid a few months ago. That concentrates minds, and if you have a solution, then which might allow them to stay on their beloved farms, they will listen.
Right, it's time for our keynote speaker, Peter Cairns, conservation photographer and founder of the Wild Media Foundation. He's going to take us north of the border and talk to us about Scotland, a rewilding journey.
Thank you very much indeed. Where's the thing? As we go. Thank you very much indeed, Adrian. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me here. I have to say, my natural habitat is the Scottish Highlands, so I feel a little bit like Crocodile Dundee in the middle of Newcastle last night. Terrifying. Contrary to what Adrian's just told you, that information is probably about 8 years out of date, but I'm not precious about it. My name is Pete Cairns, but I'm actually, these days, although I'd spent 27 years as a conservation photographer, I'm director of a charity called Scotland the Big Picture. We work to drive the recovery of nature across Scotland through rewilding in response to the growing biodiversity and climate crisis. Now, I don't know any of you, I don't know many of you, should I say, by any means, but I know some of you. I know that you're all very nice people. You've made me very, very welcome. So I don't want you to take this personally, but I'd rather not be here, if truth be told. I'd rather my job didn't exist. I'd rather that Scotland the Big Picture didn't exist. One of the reasons it does exist is this number. Now, around 10 years ago, 218 countries worldwide were measured for their biodiversity intactness, the completeness of their nature, if you like. 218 countries measured. This is where the UK ranked. We're one of the wealthiest, best educated countries in the world, and yet somehow we've become one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. So the reason that Scotland the Big Picture does exist, the reason that rewilding is even a word, is the degree to which dewilding has ravaged this country. And when I say this country, I'm going to be talking about Scotland tonight, but I think we all know it can be reflected across the whole of the UK. And this message of nature depletion in a modern, progressive country like Scotland comes as a shock to many people. And this is why. This is the Kerrang on the Isle of Skye. I'm sure many of you recognise the view. This is the idealised Scotland, the cliched Scotland, the Scotland that is presented to the world on all those glossy tourist brochures. And I've stood many a time at the Kerrang and listened to people around me marvel at the view, and it is one hell of a view. For most people, this iconic landmark symbolises what Scotland looks like, what they think Scotland should look like. But what they can't see, or don't see, or perhaps even won't see, is that this geological wonder, like so many others, has become an ecological vacuum. Gone are the complex woodlands that once shaped this land, gone are many of the animals that once lived on this land, and gone too are many of the people that once lived from this land. Despite their unquestionable beauty and drama, many of Scotland's glens, rivers and mountains are devoid of the complex living systems they once supported. These vast open landscapes have been simplified, dismantled, and today many of them lie silent, muted by centuries of grazing, felling, burning and draining. As a society, I think we suffer from a condition called ecological blindness. We don't see the degraded landscapes and the animals we've lost because we're not conditioned to look. We perceive a landscape of natural beauty because we're told that's what it is. And that notion is kept alive by a sort of generational amnesia, whereby each new generation accepts the landscape they're born into as normal, irrespective of how impoverished that it might be. But the reality is that we've, in relatively recent history, in a geological microsecond, really, we've lost all our large carnivores, most of our large herbivores. Scotland holds on to just 3% of its native woodlands. Many species that were once prolific now teeter on the edge, and our natural habitats are fragmented and isolated. We've arrived at a bizarre point where we celebrate, cherish, and even pay to actively conserve landscapes that serve the needs of just a few species and, crucially, just a few people. We believe it doesn't have to be this way. We believe there's a solution, and it's called rewilding. And this isn't the first time this question has been asked today. What is rewilding? Well, if we went around the audience, I'm sure 100 of you would give 100 different answers. Everyone has an opinion on rewilding and the change that they perceive that it might bring about. And of course, in their quest for sensationalism and conflict, the popular media would have us believe it's all about rampaging wolves and farmers being driven off their land and all those lurid headlines that you read. So it is fair to say that definitions do vary. For us, this is rewilding, an evolving process of nature recovery that leads to restored ecosystem health, function, and completeness. But what does that look like? Well, in essence, we want to see hundreds of thousands of Scottish acres that presently look something like this, transformed into acres that look more like this. More trees, more flowers, more insects, more birds, more fish, and ultimately, more people living healthy, fulfilling lives as part of vibrant communities. Rewilding is an opportunity to return abundance and diversity of life to our degraded ecosystems so that they work in all their colourful complexity. Rewilding is an opportunity to stitch back together a tapestry of life where natural processes drive vibrant living systems. Processes like predator-prey dynamics, like scavenging, like birth, death, decay, regeneration. These are the processes that drive every healthy living system on Earth. Rewilding is about encouraging rivers shaded by corridors of alder and willow to run as they want to, as they need to, allowing natural debris like fallen trees to accumulate in river channels, enriching the water for insects and bird life. Rewilding is about connectivity across the landscape, encouraging native woodland to expand, to regulate our climate, allowing animals freedom to roam, creating wildlife highways for red squirrels to move from tree to tree. Rewilding is understanding that a forest, for example, is much more than just a sea of trees. It's a complex community of soil microbes, lichens, mosses, tall trees, tiny trees, dead and dying trees, all coming together in a constantly evolving system. Rewilding is about re-wetting, restoring Scotland's peatlands that across huge areas have been drained and burned, giving them a chance to purify our water, to store carbon, as well as providing sanctuary for some of our most precious wildlife. At its most basic level, rewilding is anything that counteracts more de-wilding, anything that enriches and joins up habitats rather than further fragment and degrade them, anything that leads to more nature and not less nature. It always gets people. So why is rewilding needed? Well, lots of reasons. I'm sure lots of them have been alluded to today. That figure of 189 for starters. But more broadly, I think it is fair to say that traditional conservation has failed to arrest and reverse ecological decline. Doug Chadwick, a renowned wildlife biologist, sums it up well, I think. He says the essence of nature is wholeness. A wholeness woven from infinite complexity. Trying to save nature piece by piece doesn't make sense, even if we had all the time in the world, and we most certainly do not. I'm sure there are lots of people in this room who would agree that for the last 30, 40, 50 years, conservationists have been trying to save nature piece by piece. Red squirrels, corncrakes, capercaillie, water voles, wildcats, brown hares, seabirds. At one time or another, we've had a go at saving them all. A rare species here, a fragment of habitat there. And there have been successes, there's no doubt about that. Pine martens, the recovery of pine martens in the last couple of decades shows what can be achieved. And all that we did with pine martens is give them a bit of extra habitat and stop killing them. And yet, across Scotland, that wholeness that Doug Chadwick spoke about remains broken. We seem unable to acknowledge that we're all bound up in an intricate web of life that ties us to the seas, the soils, the atmosphere, the weather, the plants, and every other living creature on the planet. This is what conservation looks like in Scotland. Fenced reserve, not necessarily physically fenced, but philosophically fenced, if you like, that are often designed to protect individual species rather than set free the processes that drive dynamic living systems. We need to think beyond these tiny green boxes and stretch our imaginations to what else is possible and not just settle for what is familiar or comfortable. We need to rebuild the whole. We need to see the big picture. Another reason that we need rewilding is that for centuries we've been pitching our ecological systems in direct competition with our economic systems. And the truth is that nature is losing in a war with our insatiable appetite for economic growth. In my lifetime, the number of wild animals has halved. The number of people has trebled. Our climate is changing, and the natural systems that underpin our very existence are under threat. So actually, you don't have to give a hoot about pine martens or pine trees or, I don't know, pine hoverflies, because this is about us. And if not our survival, then certainly our well-being. And well-being is significant here. We need wildness in our lives. There's now a growing body of compelling evidence that links a detachment from nature to a whole host of both physical and mental conditions, especially among young people. And there's a wider moral issue at work here too. We've stripped our forests, we've drained our wetlands, we've eliminated many species that once lived here. These are all things that we quite understandably now condemn in other countries. And yet we sit in judgment on those countries, our moral integrity summed up by that figure of 189. So ultimately, rewilding asks us all to think differently, to reconsider our place in the natural order as just one species among many. Rewilding is as much a change in mindset, a philosophical change in mindset, as it is a physical change to the land and the sea. And this is where it starts to get complicated. Do you know, sometimes people say to me, it must be great having a job where you work in beautiful landscapes and with sexy wildlife species. And I say, yeah, that must be great. That's not what I do. For the most part, my job is just with one species, this one. Because this is the species that holds the key to the rewilding door. The practical idea of rewilding is a relatively simple one, but the social and cultural landscapes it must navigate are anything but simple. The recovery of nature in the UK rests with people. It's 20% ecology and 80% psychology. The battleground, if there is one, is for all of our hearts and minds. Rewilding is seen by many people as a transformational approach to addressing the dual crises of climate breakdown and global nature loss. It represents a positive pathway to a future that is much richer in nature. But as rewilding has grown in popularity, so have concerns about the changes that it could bring about. For some people, the word itself is off-putting, somehow suggesting a backward step, the re-bit, if you like. For others, the concept of wildness is challenging, somehow implying an uncultivated, inhospitable, and crucially, uninhabited state, a peopleless landscape. But whatever rewilding might mean, there are quite a number of people who are sure that they don't like it. With this in mind, we published this report last year, Hearts and Minds. I have a few copies with me. Hearts and Minds assesses the social and cultural barriers to rewilding and whether they might be holding back the restoration of our living systems. My own kind of Hearts and Minds journey, if you like, goes back, 25 years, I guess, when I worked as a photojournalist. I was exploring the story of the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone in the States. And over a number of visits, I spoke to lots of people, farmers, hunters, researchers, scientists, tourism operators, and just normal people, about their views on wolves. And very quickly, common themes emerged. Very quickly, conversations were no longer about wolves themselves, but about how people frame wolves in their minds. Many Americans felt that reintroducing wolves was simply a righting an historic wrong, while others resented their return, feeling that these animals were being imposed on rural communities, that those communities were being robbed of the power to make their own decisions and forge their own destinies. The return of wolves was seen by some as an affront on the very identity of rural America. And as I've travelled around the world exploring this bizarre and ludicrous relationship or interface between people and nature, that same story, that same narrative has played out again and again and again. Wolves in America, bears in Finland, hen harriers in Scotland, beavers in Northumberland. The backdrop and the characters might change, but the basic story remains pretty much the same. The ranchers that I spoke to in the US, they didn't necessarily hate wolves, but they resented the challenge to their custodianship of their land. They rallied against people that far away in city offices who they didn't know, who they didn't trust, who had never walked a mile in their shoes, but who were nevertheless starting to dictate, making decisions that threatened their way of life. As I said earlier, the popular media, certainly in Scotland, often reduces rewilding to a simple debate over large predators or deer numbers or beavers or grouse moors. And of course, all of these ingredients play a role. But this is a really complex discussion because people are complex creatures. And across the spaces where rewilding is discussed, this complexity, this nuance, is so often lost. Entrenched opinions are delivered with very little tolerance for different perspectives. And this is especially true on social media, where the only currency we see seems to be right and wrong, black and white. Are you one of us or are you one of them? And this is what that looks like. Give me a minute to read it. I see hundreds of these types of posts, lazy, ill-informed generalizations that do nothing except perpetuate division, prejudice, mistrust. This is another. This constant cycle of finger-pointing where people's opinions are presented as facts, it undermines our ability to have progressive, measured, and respectful conversations. And we've got to get past this. We absolutely have to get past this. Hearts and Minds is part of a project that we call Building Bridges, which seeks to diffuse the notion that rewilding has to be a choice between the needs of nature and the needs of people. We hope, perhaps naively, that by building bridges we can create solutions that work for both. There are many places in the world where people are required or are willing to live alongside dangerous wild animals that can kill them. Now we don't, so the media invents them. Spiders are portrayed as terrifying home invaders. Red kites allegedly terrorise rural villages. Psycho gulls trap people in their car. Even the plants are out to get us. The countryside is full of thistles and nettles and foxgloves. The British public has become increasingly removed from nature. The countryside is something to be looked at and admired rather than lived in. This disconnection has embedded a deep fear of many animals, and it's encouraged by a media that is attracted, obsessed with hysteria-grabbing headlines. This is just one example of hundreds I could quote from the Inverness Courier, of all places. Pupils at Aldern Primary School are warned to be vigilant after a badger is seen wandering in the school grounds. I mean, we laugh, and it is laughable. But the ecological illiteracy that persists across all of British media, I think, certainly the popular media, it makes rewilding a tough sell. This relentless demonisation. Again, you know, these cultural stories, they resonate with us. But it is demonisation of wildlife. It deepens our fears. It further alienates us from our place in that natural order. We've lost the psychological mindset to live alongside large, wild animals. The UK is now just one of a handful of European countries refusing to live with lynx. It's not that we can't. There's plenty of food, there's plenty of habitat. It is that we won't. Large carnivores like lynx, like wolves, like bears, are now spreading across mainland Europe. There are wolves living in Italy, in France, in Spain, in Germany. There are now wolves living in Belgium and the Netherlands, of all places. So it's not that we can't, it is that we won't. Endless research tells us that apex predators are essential to healthy ecosystems, but no more so than the tiniest of insects. It's the interaction and interdependencies of all species that allows nature to work. The big picture. So, if rewilding is such a good thing, why isn't it happening across more of Scotland? Well, bit by bit, it is. So this is Cairngorms Connect, Britain's biggest habitat restoration project, a 200-year vision to restore 600 square kilometres of forest, peatland, loch and river, right at the heart of the Cairngorms National Park. This is Glenfeshie, which is part of the Cairngorms Connect partnership. After centuries of intense management, predominantly for deer stalking and grouse shooting, this landscape is being allowed to breathe, to recover, to start to govern itself, nature being allowed back on its own terms. And for the first time in decades, perhaps even centuries, the old pines on the valley floor have neighbours, sprightly youngsters popping up next to their parents and grandparents. Hen harriers are returning after decades of being absent. Golden eagles are breeding without fear of persecution. Piece by piece, that jigsaw of life is being put back together. The rare, the common, the spectacular, the barely visible. This is Abernethy Forest. Many of you will know Abernethy, RSPB, of course, also part of the Cairngorms Connect area. Here, Highland cattle are replicating the natural grazing patterns of lost herbivores. Plantations of Scots pine are being restructured, beaten up, if you like, to create complexity. As was said earlier, nature doesn't like simplicity, it likes complexity. Standing deadwood is creating homes for woodpeckers and for crested tits. At Mar Lodge, on the opposite side of the Grampians, on Deeside, large areas are being given over to nature recovery. Woodland is regenerating, and up on the tops, peatland restoration is gathering momentum. We now know, of course, that healthy peatland stores more carbon than tropical rainforests. So if we can get these natural giant sponges functioning as they can store huge amounts of water and huge amounts of carbon. And the great thing about peatland restoration is that it works, and it works really, really quickly. This aerial image shows you what can happen after just a few weeks of blocking drains and reprofiling open hags. So if we can think differently, seeing peatlands not as a commodity to be exploited, but as an ally, then things can change pretty quickly. I said that Cairngorms Connect was Britain's biggest habitat restoration. That's actually no longer true. It's been trumped by this project, Afric Highlands. Covers about 850 square kilometres. And again, it's a combination of nature recovery, climate mitigation, and opportunities for local communities. Craigmeggy in Loch Arbour is another landscape-scale rewilding initiative. Ditto Allerdale in Sutherland, Benay in Wester Ross. It is fair to say that not all of these initiatives will brand themselves as rewilding, but the common theme, the principles, are those that support ecosystem health, function, and completeness. 3 years ago, Scott in the Big Picture was approached by 3 farmers asking how to rewild their land. And we didn't know. We couldn't provide a coherent answer. We fudged it, is the truth of it. And this was the catalyst for what has now become the Northwoods Rewilding Network. In 2 years, just over 2 years, those 3 farmers have become 56 land partners. Farms, crofts, small estates, community land holdings, a golf course, a school. This is a series of ecological stepping stones across the country. And there are a few unique elements, I hope, to Northwoods. Firstly, one of the founding principles behind the network was to make rewilding more accessible, more democratic. So all of our land partners cover between 100 and 1,000 acres. Still pretty big, but not on the scale of Cairngorms Connect or Afric Highlands. Secondly, we recognise that in many cases, ecological recovery is only possible, it's certainly easier, when it works in tandem with local communities. So we combine rewilding with the development of nature-based enterprise to make rewilding an economically viable land use choice. And thirdly, and critically, people power. This is a dashboard for our rewilding actions across the network in 2022. 56 land partners represents 56 rewilding teams on the ground delivering impact. So harnessing people power, harnessing not only ecological connectivity, but people connectivity is key to the success of the network. We believe that any of these initiatives, from the landscape scale of Cairngorms Connect to the ecological stepping stones of Northwoods, are replicable anywhere. The context will be different, the scale will be different, but the principles are universal. So while rewilding might remain uncomfortable for some people, there is no doubt that appetite is growing. Now, Scotland the Big Picture has never been in the business of telling people what to think. I hope that we're not that stupid or arrogant. But we meet quite a few people who remain sceptical about rewilding, but are also concerned about the future for rural Scotland. And we posed 2 questions to those people. If not rewilding, then what? And if not now, then when? So as I said earlier, the popular media have a tendency to make rewilding synonymous with wolves. And I hope that I've managed to convince you that it's about so much more. Of course it is. You all know that. That said, wolves are part of this story. And I'm just going to wrap up with a short passage written by Aldo Leopold, an American hunter turned conservationist. We were eating lunch on a high rim rock when we saw what we thought was a doe fording a torrent. When she climbed the bank towards us, we realised our error. It was a wolf. In those days, we'd never heard of passing up a chance to kill a wolf, and in a second, we were pumping lead. When our rifles were empty, the old wolf was down. We reached her in time to watch a fierce green fire dying in her eyes. I realised then, and have known ever since, that there was something new to me in those eyes. I was young back then and full of trigger itch. I thought that because fewer wolves meant more deer, that no wolves would mean hunter's paradise. But after seeing that green fire die, I sensed that neither the wolf nor the mountain agreed with such a view. That experience caused Leopold to rethink his relationship with the wild world. And that's what rewilding offers us, the opportunity to rethink our relationship with the wild world, to think about our place within it, and crucially, our reliance on it. So, thank you for listening. If you'd like to come along on Scotland's rewilding journey, we'd be delighted to have you on board. This is where you can find us. We're on all the usual social media channels and all that stuff. Thank you.
Very good. Yeah. Well, we've got time for a few questions after that very inspirational presentation by Peter, which I found extremely uplifting. One thing I should have said at the very outset of today is, could you switch your mobile phones off? Any questions for Peter?
I've got a quick one. Yeah.
Why do I feel this is loaded?
Where do we start, Peter, in bleeding all of that over the border?
Well, you know, I think for me, what rewilding is about is not. Oh, sorry. It's not so much about the physical change. I think that's the easy bit in many ways. You know, we perhaps 25 years ago we didn't know how to restore peatlands, regenerate forests, whatever, but we do now. The bigger challenge is hearts and minds. And the answer to that, I think, is not quickly and not easily. But I'm trying to think who it was earlier. It might have actually been you, Mike, but somebody said something along the line. Well, I'll tell you a little story of something I learned a long time ago from Christine Tompkins, who some of you may know. Her and her husband, Doug, have done huge amounts of work down in South America with regard to rewilding. And she said to me, start with the story. And I think it might have been Anne, actually, who said, you know, almost build it and they will come. And I think we're bad at that. You know, we're talking earlier on, in the conservation community, we're paralysed by fear. Let's be honest, we're paralysed by fear and process. And so before we press the green button, we want to have everything perfectly aligned. Everybody in agreement, everybody in consensus, funding structures in place, outcomes in place, prescriptions, management plans, analysis, data. We have to have it all there. Start with the story and run with it, see where it goes. And people will support you. Not everyone, but people will, especially in the climate we're in at the moment. You know, I was buoyed to hear about Coca-Cola, for example. You know, some people might consider that to be getting in bed with the devil. But we have to be pragmatic and we have to run with it. If the level of ambition that I think we all have in this room is to be realised, then we've got to start thinking differently. So I think a little bit of bravery perhaps is the answer to your question, Mike.
Walter?
What's your view on land ownership?
How long have you got? Okay, so just very quickly, if I can, the backdrop in Scotland is that there's a big drive towards land reform, wrestling land ownership away from what is a very small number of big landowners or landowners with big land holdings into a more democratic, socially just basis. And I think most people, certainly I don't disagree with the principle of that, the ideology of that. I think that makes absolute sense. But at a realistic level, I've seen community land ownership in action, and there are some good examples and there are some dreadful examples. And if I may say, the beauty of a private landowner, and I live next to Scotland's biggest, in terms of his land holding, not his girth, he's able to click his fingers and make stuff happen straight away. And if you take a walk up Glenfeshie, I've been up there with Anne and Mike, you can see the results for yourself. He made a decision to do a certain style of management, and the result, whether you like it or not, is irrelevant. The cause and effect is manifest. So I think in a perfect world, if we can harness the best from the private sector, and by that I'm also including private landowners, not only money, but also leadership and skills and knowledge and networks, fuel that, channel that into nature recovery, and then what comes out the other end, which is the missing link at the moment, I think, is societal benefit, is public benefit. If we can get that conveyor belt going, then for me personally, I don't care who owns the land, it's what they do with it. And I think there is a role for private landowners, there's a role for community landowners, there's a role for NGOs, and everything in between. And what we're also seeing, I think, certainly in Scotland, is a hybrid model of some of those things. You know, sort of blended ownership, if you like, in some ways. So for me, it's less about whose name is on the title deeds and more about what they do with that opportunity. Yeah, I'm not some sort of raging socialist.
Question over here.
It's just a quick question. In my work on large-scale infrastructure work, we had lots of back and forth about quite ambitious landscape kind of improvements and enhancements to come out of these, and we found lots of barriers associated with statutory designations. How much of a barrier has that been on your sort of journey with rewilding in Scotland, given the extent of land designations and what they are designated for?
It's a problem. There's no doubt about that. We live in a heavily bureaucratic country. It is a problem. It is easier in Scotland to do it at scale just because of the physical characteristics of the country and the population dynamics, etc. But it is a barrier. If you don't mind, I'm going to slightly dodge the question and answer a different one, which I think is relevant and related. Roy Dennis, many of you know Roy Dennis, of a celebrated naturalist, pioneer really in this field many, many years ago with ospreys, white-tailed eagles, etc. When I first met Roy 25, 30 years ago, he said a funny thing to me. He was halfway up a tree mending an osprey nest, and he said, you might think that your vision will be impinged upon by landowners, farmers, gamekeepers, gillies. What you'll find is that the very people that you think are your allies will be your biggest barrier. And with the greatest respect, he meant you guys. He meant the conservation establishment. So going back to Mike's question, yes, there are physical, legal, bureaucratic barriers, no doubt about that, but sometimes we disable ourselves from trying to cross those barriers by being fearful and apologetic, and again, waiting for all the stars to align. You know, a few people have mentioned Derek Gow. I'm not going to repeat the language that Derek would use, but he would say, get through it, bust through those barriers. And I think we've got to kind of, sounds a bit, no, I'm not going to use that term, it sounds sexist, but we've got to put our big boy pants on a little bit, you know. Still sounds sexist, I know, but I can't think of an analogy, but you know what I mean. So I think, you know, it's very easy for all of us, and I'm not blaming anybody, but it's very easy to assume that it can't be done because you've got a wall of opposition in your face. The Tompkins of this world, the Paulsons of this world, dare I say it, the Anne Reeses of this world, they just kick those barriers down and get on with it. And we all admire it in those people, and yet we're a little bit reticent at replicating it. Sorry, probably crossed the line there, but you know where I'm coming from.
Right, I think we've actually got time for a little bit of roundtable discussion then, haven't we? So we've created a bit of space. At the conclusion of today, we've factored in about a half-hour panel session with Mike, with Elaine from National Trust, with Mary Goff from Heppel Gin, and Katie Bart from the Wildlife Trust. And I think the idea is that we sort of hover around this table and field some more questions, and maybe have some concluding thoughts as well. So we'll make that happen.
We haven't got chairs.
We haven't got chairs.
Okay.
Could be standing room only. Or they...
The chairs are too big.
How good are your legs?
Yeah.
Can you stand?
Yeah. Are you happy to stand?
Okay. Right, they're glad to stand. Right, okay. So I think the first question that I would put to all you guys is a very obvious one. And that is, what are your takeaways from today? And we'll go left to right, starting with your good self.
Thanks. I can go if you want to go this way. The general manager at Wallington is very much a kick the door down sort of person, and she'll be very pleased that I'll be pushing to do more of the same. I'm on her side, I think.
More door kicking,
Yeah.
Very good. Right, that's given you time to formulate an answer.
I think like with a lot of these events, some of the most useful stuff happens outside of the auditorium. And while, it's been absolutely fantastic what everyone's said and all the talks today, and when I go back through my notes that I was scribbling, I will process it and absorb it. But the networking opportunities and having the chance to talk to a great number of you in the room, and some that I didn't manage to speak to yet, but are on my list in terms of putting a lot of the stuff we've been talking about into action. I think a lot of us have got that ambition that Mike talks about at the beginning for really scaling up, for wanting to work beyond our boundaries. A lot of us doing the sort of management on the ground day to day. Yeah, you're really kind of focused in on your bit, but we know we need to work beyond our boundaries, and we want to do that, and it's partly why we're here. But there's been a lot of conversations going on with, particularly on yours and Anne's remarks at the beginning, sort of saying, right, how can we do this? And putting together some follow-up actions, particularly around data, and also landscape recovery, pilots and bids and things. So I think a lot of action is going to come out of
just being here today has been the driver, hasn't it? Right, I'm going to skip Mike and go to Katie, because Mike will probably speak for the next 30 minutes.
Thanks, Adrian. I think, I need to steal all my thunder, I think. So, personally, a couple of weeks ago, I was lucky enough with my colleague to attend the Rewilding Britain Wilding Networks, Rewilding Network conference. We came away from that feeling really reinvigorated, and that was obviously at kind of an England scale. And now, today, honed in on that Northumberland, and it's really just wants us to get on and do stuff, and just seeing that appetite, the conversations I've had, that we've all had, knowing that everybody wants to do it and that we're in probably a really good place to facilitate that and to keep those discussions going, and that's very much part of my role. So yeah, just kind of big kick up the bum, I think. That's what I've taken from today, if that's fair.
Kick down doors, kick up the bum. Right, Mike, what's your take?
I've got many takeaways. I hope this isn't the end of the conversation, is the first thing. It has to be the start, doesn't it, of trying to get the connectivity that started here today to be carried forward. And we might actually have to have boring things like more meetings and workshops to actually facilitate that happening in smaller groups, because I think the collaborative effort might have to happen in clusters rather than at this size. So I think how we do that, I'm open to suggestion, but we might have to make that happen mechanistically. Otherwise, we'll all drift away into our own little worlds and silos again. So I'm determined to make that happen. That's my promise to you, really, to try to take that forward. I think the other thing I want to try to, I wouldn't kick the doors down. I've done quite a bit of that in my time, but very often they've been nailed back on. And that's why we're still here, isn't it? Do you know, someone in the audience handed me a paper from 2004, and it was the Northumberland Wildlife Trust proceedings for our AGM at Spade Adam. Guess what the subject was? Rewilding. And we have done some, but we haven't really done it, have we? Another lovely phrase that Rob Stoneman came up said yesterday is, you know, we look at our nature reserves as arcs, but arcs, however big they are, and however big the lands that we own and manage are no good unless you open the door at the end. And so we do have to kick down the doors. And I think that's, for me, that is daring to think the unspeakable even, and that is entering into psychology rather than just the ecology. And being brave enough to use the L word even in our area. I think we all know what that means, not lines but links. And you know, even the thought of that, even the prospect, even having the conversation will make other things happen. So I think we have to take the whole thing up and be brave enough to do it. That's my take.
Excellent. Right, in true question time fashion then, I'll throw the panel open to the floor. Are you guys okay standing? Great. Take it away, Charlie.
You probably know this, but in Northumberland, 60% of the land holding is tenanted. I think one of the biggest problems we have is the relationship of landlord to tenant. It just doesn't really work on either side. And now, especially what's happening is, how can tenants do all of this? And so what needs to happen is that they need to be rewarded to doing it. And we need to have people like the National Trust, if possible, to set the example of changing that relationship. Do you agree?
Yes. For the new tenancy at Gallows Hill, we had some open days, and tenant engagement, not something that I've really done a lot of in my career, but I'm learning really quickly now. And I was amazed at how young everyone was, how either they were living with their parents still on their farm, or they had like small holdings dotted around. And I didn't realise how short the average farm business tenancy is. And I think I was talking to people about this in the breaks. How can anyone achieve anything if their farm business tenancy is 2 years long? How can they take the risk of putting all these measures in if their landlord can suddenly turn around with a break clause and kick them off? And it's, you know, it does need landlords to make that change and offer tenancies that are a decent length, offer support where we can in terms of helping them to navigate through these difficult times, giving them alternatives if we can. Because you think about Wallington, there are families who've lived there for generations, and our severest critics seem to think, and it's very interesting to hear what you say about opinion, and they think we just want to kick them all off, and maybe there might be individuals who feel that way, but that's not how I feel. I had an excellent visit with one of our farms, the north, right at the top of Green Lighton, and she said, what are you here for? What do you want? And I said, I just want to understand what it's like to be you, what it means to be you every day, and how your farm works. And we didn't even talk about nature, because I know coming down the line I'm going to have to, and I'm going to have to write about it and fill in these big forms for funding that we have to do. But I want to understand why they're there, how long they've been there, what they do, what it means, how it's a struggle. And I think that's some of the stuff that the National Trust has started. You know, I said when conversation had started in 2018, that's why it's been very slow, and it can be quite frustrating. And yes, I said I want to kick doors down. But when it comes to our tenancy, if we lose one of them, we could lose all of them. And I obviously don't want that to happen. It would be my fault. But like I said before, you know, someone brought this notion of a proper farmer. And obviously listening to your talk, I've not heard you talk before, but I've heard about you. Are you a proper farmer? Is somebody who grazes with 10,000 sheep a proper farmer? You know.
Somebody who's been a farmer. Somebody
Yeah.
who plays letters a farmer. What you're talking about, what you're coming against, is traditional farming. And what you need to do in the tenancy model is make it worthwhile and look
Yeah.
after the environment. So it's not actually the landlord's fault, it's actually the system's fault.
Yeah.
Both of them need to be rewarded. So it's a partnership. So the whole thing is you step change, that's what it's about.
Yeah, and it's just starting those conversations, and we did end up actually talking about wildlife at the end of the visit. Not I didn't instigate it; the tenant did, which was great. And I hope to be able to do more of the same with all the tenants on Wallington, for those that are ready and those that are maybe not quite so, but who are going to be watching over the fence to see what other people and our neighbours are already doing. Does anyone else?
Thank you, Elaine. Do you have a take on that, Mary?
Yeah, some of you will know that I spent a lot of my working life in previous jobs before I was lucky enough to work for Walter, working with tenant farmers. I was farm advisor for the National Trust, so I put together a whole host of farm plans for the tenancies on the Wallington estate, and I'm glad to see that, 20 or so years later, that a lot of the things I'd put in those plans in joint discussion with the tenants. It wasn't a kind of imposed top-down, it was very much that, bottom-up, sitting around the kitchen table, looking at their aspirations for what they wanted to achieve in life and trying to blend it with what the National Trust was after as well, and the landlords supporting them as well, because as we know, often sometimes there's not long-term tenancies, sometimes there are, but there's the lack of capital and all the other things, and sometimes it's learning new skills, because a lot of the tenants have got some amazing skills in sort of livestock and all sorts of other knowledge, but there's other skills that a new sort of modern tenant needs, and that we also need new entrants in. Wallington are now doing that, inviting people in, and I think the challenge is, how do we get people with all those skills? Because there's a lot of people who come from different backgrounds, maybe ecology, conservation, business. They don't have some of the practical outdoor livestock skills, and we need people with all those skills to really achieve this. So, there's massive opportunity, and I think the tenants do need to be brought along, and can be. It's all about incentivising. But we shouldn't be afraid to say, actually, we do need new blood. There's, like we were saying earlier, it's really hard to buy land. So for those, and there's one or two in this room I know, who really want these opportunities to manage land for wildlife, and they bring some amazing skills, and I think they'd be fantastic at it, but they can't get that opportunity because they can't afford to buy land, and tenancies don't come up very often, or they go down to the next generation. So there does need to be change.
I was interested to hear how in the National Park, when you ended the tenancy at Greenlee, I wondered what the reaction was locally to that.
That process did actually happen just before I started on the project, but I do know from conversations that there was criticisms of that, because there's the appearance that it was the National Park removing farmers from the landscape. Now, we haven't actually reduced the number of farmers in that landscape. We've reduced the number of livestock through the decision we made. But that is very much what we have to work around, or work with, when we're trying to get to the place we want to be within the project. We want to be in a position where what we put on the table is attractive and is a viable alternative to what's happening at the moment. It's about putting something that incentivises and encourages them to come on that journey with us, and that's a very important part of it. But yes, that first step of changing those long-term farm business tenancies that the park had been involved in did bring in criticism from the community.
Any more questions for the panel? Yes, the gentleman at the back.
Still wearing a navy blue jumper.
Indeed.
A quick couple of points. I wonder what the panel think of it. I come at this as a historian, and there's been hints that history is important to discussion over the course of the day, but we haven't really gone, very much into it. And a lot of what we're talking about today is trying to reverse change and so on, the effects of the second agricultural, revolution. We just heard a reference to traditional agriculture. There's no such thing really in Britain as traditional agriculture. It's virtually meaningless to talk about agriculture in any sense as traditional. So we're talking about the language of rewilding and so on. Perhaps what we're also talking about here is the third agricultural revolution, and perhaps a way of sort of connecting with food producers and people who identify very strongly as food producers, is to think about this perhaps also as an agricultural revolution, as opposed to something that is just that uses the language of nature restoration and farming with nature, and so on and so forth. So I think we've really got to get rid of this idea that there's something out there that's traditional, it's it's almost meaningless. It's the second agricultural revolution. It's the stuff that happened from the 1930s onwards that has caused this catastrophic collapse in biodiversity in Britain, and that's the stuff we're dealing with. And as people have pointed out, a lot of it was state-led, and a lot of it was about a social democratic commitment to cheap food. So the politics of it is really complicated. I have views about land ownership, I'm not going to say them here, but this isn't just about that kind of agri-tourism. It's also about a kind of the post-war settlement and the way that those social goods were delivered through agriculture.
Is that a question?
I'd genuinely be interested in reflections of the panel.
Mike, there you are. I'll bow you that googly, Mike.
I can't express that any better than that, but I do think that if we don't address the sort of farming issue, the cultural farming issue centrally, then how is the nature recovery going to happen in the wider landscape? Because the big takeaway for me today, even the intention behind this, was really to say, well, we're all doing these little bits, and we might even accumulate more. They might even grow in size. But if we don't really work them outwards through those tendencies, through farming and landowning estates across the whole landscape, then we're not going to create joined-up networks of any meaningful size. So I take a lot of inspiration from Pete Cairns and what they're doing in Scotland, because I'd love to see that same approach here. Because I think that's what is happening with addressing the psychologies of owning land. That is actually starting to open up new ways of looking at the whole piece. So I agree, it's not about looking backwards, it's learning from the history, but there isn't any traditional way of managing land. It's a case of what happens next that's important. We have to look forward.
Now, I think just Mike mentioned the links word, and I think in Northumberland it's something that has queered the pitch, shall we say. But it's a personal reflection, and I, in no way am an expert in working with farmers, but a school friend of mine, so I'm from Haltwhistle, a school friend of mine who farms up the North Tyne. In public, you'll see on his Facebook, rewilding's this, rewilding's that. It's awful, they don't know what they're talking about. The sort of thing Peter put up. He sends me Facebook messages. Katie, would you mind just coming and talking to me about beavers? Could we just talk about waterfalls? You know, but he doesn't want to stick his neck above the parapet. But he wants to talk about his interests. He's an intelligent guy. And those people exist. But we do get into this generalisation as well. And Pete's right. So those sort of conversations are so important, that one-to-one, that trust building. And I know he trusts me because we've known each other since we were 13. He knows me. I know him. You know, so that trust, that one-to-one relationship that we have to work on, hearts and minds, it is, isn't it? It's got to be.
Mary, were you going to say something?
Yeah, there's so many elements to your statement there. But just about the history, I think about it a lot, even though I ended up doing sciencey ecology things in my training. History was always a fascination of mine, and I think there's so much we can learn, and it was fascinating in your talk, Charlie. You know, you've done more research than I've had time to, looking back, you know, so pulling out old maps and just learning from the old people who were still around, who can remember managing the countryside before it became easy with imported pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides, which is what's really the countryside, basically. So, and then looking back further in history, and there's quite an interesting project that we're hopefully getting involved with Oxford University, which is looking like right back into the, what do they call it, the recent prehistoric, using some of that to sort of look more about the archaeological evidence from our landscapes, and not just with a view to sort of human habitation, but you know, the wildlife that was there, and you know, the food that was being produced. And I think particularly in the uplands, places like Happel, which, you know, as we've all said, you know, they're not really making money from producing livestock. They're doing it because it's been heavily subsidised by the government. And these landscapes, we can still produce food. Our ancestors always did. And they did it, they were part of the ecosystem. You know, they were getting food. And so I think there's an awful lot we can learn. And sometimes people say, well, you can't turn the clock back. And is it progress? But I think we can bring, you know, we've got so much more modern technologies that we can bring into the mix. But, you know, so, diets changing, a lot of people not wanting to eat lamb and beef as much, and our countryside can still produce things. I mean, God, hazel grows like a weed in Northumberland. I'm sure a lot of you spend a lot of money putting hazelnuts on your muesli that have probably come from Turkey or somewhere, you know. So we can produce food, and people who are passionate about food production can get involved. And so that reflection back into history and learning from that, I think, is really important as well, and can play a part in the future of our landscapes.
Got another question over here. Sorry, you talk about traditional, and I know you're talking about farming, but obviously on the Wallington estate, in terms of history, it's a design landscape. And when I first started at the National Trust, I could feel some tension between the two, the nature and the historic. And I invested a lot of time talking to our archaeologists and our curatorial staff. And it's not that they hate nature or don't want nature to happen. They just want to be part of the conversation, and they hate it when they're brought in at the last minute, and then if they say no, it's seen as a blocker. Oh, you're just a blocker. No, we don't want to deal with you. And it's like, no, if we involve them in the beginning, you know, we've come up with some really good solutions to problems around historic features in the work that we're trying to do, because the conversation happened early.
Thank you. Gentleman here, this is en route.
I like to relate matters back to financial. You might think that we gave an awful lot of money, £2 million, to enable you to do this, Mike. Do you know what the equivalent would be if we'd left it in the stock market? No. Well, it would have been a minus quantity since then. but in longer term terms, it's only £80,000 per annum, which is probably only the cost of time, the wage for some of the lesser paid people in this room too. It's nothing. It's £80,000 a year, and you've got to produce a bigger benefit out of Wallington, out of Witherington than £80,000 a year. I'm sure you can do that.
I don't know if you want to answer that one, right? No. We'll take another question.
Well, I can give something to that. What would be really helpful, and February half term was a classic example of this. I was on leave. I came back, saw an email saying, there's a funding pot from DEFRA. You know, you've got 10 days to fill it in. And I'm like, phew, I've missed that. That's obviously not happening. And then I've written some quick funding bids in my time, but I think we did 6 hours, didn't we? Because they said, no, we're definitely putting something in. And I just wish that would change. I wish that mentality would change. I wish, obviously Anne talks about being ready. I wish they'd give us the funds to be ready. I wish they'd give us the funds over a longer period of time. You know, that funding bid, if it comes off, will have to all be delivered by March next year. Yeah. And it's like, part of me wants it and part of me doesn't. Interesting you say that. My husband works in marketing, and this week I came home and I was like, I've got £50,000, yeah, amazing. And I went, and he just sort of looks at me and goes, yeah, I spend that in like 5 minutes. You know, and I was like, what he spends on his Vodafone account for the whole year would keep projects like ours going for 50. And that's kind of infuriating as well.
Very good observation. Gentleman at the back.
Thank you. Would the panel agree that in areas, as in geographic places, where we're prioritising nature recovery, the commitment should be to trust the natural processes, even in places that might happen to be designated, and where the tendency will be to keep them as they are?
Yes, do, thank you.
Yes, I agree. Heppel is heavily designated, as somewhere not like Wallington, who has very little. We've got special area of conservation over half the estate, Triple SI, River Coquet, and so, yeah, potentially we could be really constrained. Luckily, when we were considering making the sort of quite radical changes that have happened in the last couple of years, we had discussions up front with Natural England and other agencies to check that they'd be supportive and allow us to come away from these quite rigid targets that traditional conservation have set, only having a certain percentage of trees on your heathland, for example. So, yeah, those kinds of designations can be really sort of constraining, but luckily there are enough people, I think, involved in nature conservation now that are allowing natural processes to evolve and shape it. And I think some people were talking to the chief scientist in one of the organisations, and he was saying, well, actually, it's going to take a long time anyway, and it's not going to be my problem. I'll be retired, you know. So, like, great, bring it on, you know. It's just, we'll carry on. But I think it's interesting looking at some of the projects that were talked about today, and there's quite a mix of, you know, natural processes appeared just about every presentation is what people are trying to do, but there was still an awful lot of intervention. You know, Wallington's an example, isn't it? And all the sites, you know, people are merrily planting trees and stuff, and sometimes we probably need to question that a little bit more than we do. We sometimes rush in because we need a volunteer project, or we need some carbon, or whatever. So, yeah, I think, yeah, there's some interesting conversations, and that question of, you know, when you intervene or not in a wilding project is quite an interesting one.
Yeah, I suppose I'd have to sort of have a bit of a fudge answer on that one, Richard, because on the one hand, I'm all for natural processes at landscape scale, and I think the bigger view you take of all of this, of restoration, then you want that to happen, and it can happen. The problem is we're still working at a very fragmented level with all these ecosystems, and we're not even semi-natural in many of those. And until that's the case, and we've got a bit further down the line, there's still the age-old bit of conservationist tattooed onto me that says we have to protect the best, and because actually we could even lose more, and we could do it through just abandonment to see what happens. And I think in some of those upland areas where we have really important peat bogs, the border mires, etc., you know, just to let them go back effectively to forestry, which would probably happen, wouldn't be the right way. So I think we still need interventions until we've got a bigger picture to actually let happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that you need to intervene and you need to mimic natural processes because we've got no top predators, etc., etc. That I see as part of rewilding, as part of trusting to natural processes. It's kind of giving it a little bit of a hand where the system's currently out of balance.
Yeah, and I think we're all for that. And if we go to West Chevington tomorrow, one of the first things you'll see are diggers. You know, we're making ponds where there aren't any. And, you know, we've got to help it along. If you go to West Kenhill, all the other classic sort of rewilding places, there's loads of intervention going on. You know, even putting the grazers back is intervention. So we're trying to speed up the cycle of those processes. And one of the great things that I'm taking away today is encouragement. I don't know why, but I'd forgotten that actually if you do let your hedges grow, if you do let the corners go wild, actually the yellowhammers do come back. You know, it actually isn't. You don't have to wait a lifetime. You know, these things, and you two have seen it, and we are on our sites as well. But somehow, we're not brave enough to just let that happen sometimes. So I think we need a bit of both, really. But we do definitely need to sort of open our minds to letting nature work with us more. Yeah.
Katie?
Yeah, I would just say it's about speed, isn't it? You know, things like, I've worked a lot on waterfall, and if we say, great, we'll remove the mink and let the waterfalls come back, we could be here in 20 years going, come on, lads. Because the habitat's actually there. It's not too bad. So for me, it's about speed. It's about kickstarting it. It's about you maybe have to do that at the start and then step back. It's always going to be a balance, and every bit of land or every project will have a different speed, and you can get forced into going too fast, and actually sometimes you need to go, do you know what, we're going to let it breathe for 2 years and see what's there. We don't, Ben Shaw, a classic example, remove the sheep because you had to, but actually we weren't kind of sure what we're doing, so we're like, well, let it breathe, see what species are coming through before we decide, oh, that needs to be there and that needs to be there, and we'll chuck that in there and that plant should be there. Oh, actually it already was, we just didn't know. So some of it's kickstart and some of it's breathing, and it's not, there's not a one size fits all, I guess.
Elaine?
Yeah, sorry, I keep going back to Gallows Hill, but it's kind of a really good example. That was left for 18 months. There's still nothing really there. If you look at the grassland, it's, you know, I mean, on the proper grazed bits, there's obviously corners and the streams and stuff still go through, and there's wildlife in there. But if you look at the grass, there's no variety at all. It's just a thatch. And that's going to take some intervention if we want to make species-rich meadows, because we could just keep grazing it and see what comes back naturally, but that could take forever. So I want to go on a trip to our friend Kevin Wharf and get some seed, and drop it and see what happens, just to give it that little bit of a push.
Brilliant. Right, thank you very much, Mary, Mike, Katie and Elaine. We'll let you sit down. You've been on your feet for half an hour, believe it or not. Thank you ever so much. And well, we're coming towards the end of what has been a fascinating day. I found it uplifting, I found it enthusing, I found it confusing sometimes. But yes, we all seem to be heading in the same direction of travel. The whole thing about this being wilding networks for the north, we're talking about rewilding and spreading those networks across landscape scale recovery, nature recovery. But we've also clearly done a lot of networking in this building, in this room today. And I would hope that everybody here has basically been furiously handing out business cards to everybody that they meet, or jotting down the name off their name tag, or taking their mobile number or their Twitter hashtag, whatever, so that they are able to then continue this conversation as we go forward. But there's some really exciting things happening, clearly, in many parts of this county and beyond. And we've heard some very exciting stuff coming from north of the border. And of course, that is all going to come across the border to us as well. You know, it's an international development. Mike, do you want to sign off?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Adrian. It's just really for me to say thank you, first of all, for all of you as delegates, for actually being here. My voice obviously isn't loud enough. Thank you for just being here and making this happen. I think maybe 3 weeks ago we were looking at the number of people who'd actually booked on and a bit worried that people weren't interested, and that's been completely disproven today. I think this, for me, hopefully for other people as well, is a bit of a moment. It's not back like in 2004 when we did a rewilding thing at our AGM. This is of a different order, and there is so much that's changed in that time and needs still to change. So we take that inspiration forward, and we will come up with the mechanisms to make that happen. I also want to obviously thank our sponsors again, Rees Foundation, and for all that they've enabled. And of course, there's much more enabling to do that goes beyond the Rees Foundation. I think I need to say that kindly to you, because we need loads of funders and loads of people to try to make this happen. And you've really catalysed things, but it needs to go beyond that. I also just wanted to say, one of them's left now, unfortunately, but we have today in our midst three of the Northumberland Wildlife Trust elders, if you like, who have been at this game longer than anyone, perhaps, and at least 50, 60 years, probably combined, I don't know, 150 years or more of conservation expertise, which started and identified all the opportunities of clearing the border mires, for instance, the College Valley, which was certainly one of the first rewilding projects in England, and really looking across the whole of the north again in terms of identifying hotspots that needed to be protected. So Ian Armstrong and Angus Lunt, now MBE, and Charles Baker Cresswell, I think we really, when we say about history, you know, they are living history and living inspiration of where this whole movement's come from. So let's build on that. And we just keep going with that, don't we? So I just thank you to everybody here today, and also Adrian, particularly for your mastership of keeping the conversation going. Thank you very much.
Which just leads me to thank all of you for coming and turning out in your numbers and starting those conversations and hopefully continuing those conversations. So we've heard from some amazing speakers today, very uplifting content indeed. And let's all thank the Northumberland Wildlife Trust for bringing us all together, for wilding West Chevington, and for bringing us together to network and start that conversation.
Say as well, a thank you for the team that's made this all happen, because it definitely wasn't me. And it's really